Focus today is on a universal human dilemma, though we are approaching it through a classical lens. Every single person listening knows the feeling of starting something new.
Oh, yeah.
A new habit, a big career goal, a personal commitment. You start with this intense fire, only to watch that motivation just slowly, almost imperceptibly ebb away until you hit a wall.
It's the motivational hangover, the
Yeah.
post-peak fatigue. We're not just talking about being tired after a long week. We're diving into a very specific, deeply analyzed concept, Fatour.
Right. It's often translated as spiritual fatigue or slackening or lethargy, and it's rooted in centuries of scholarly analysis that's focused entirely on one thing: sustainable commitment.
And our sources today are really extensive. We're drawing from the foundational texts of the Quran and Sunnah, and then augmenting that with the intellectual synthesis of scholars like Ibn al-Qayyim, al-Ghazali, Ibn Battal.
Al-Shatibi as well. And what's amazing is they don't just define the problem. They give you a comprehensive diagnostic guide. They detail its causes, its symptoms, and most importantly, its practical remedies.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission here is to transform this classical concept into highly actionable knowledge for you. This deep dive is basically a shortcut to understanding the complex mechanics of human energy, spiritual, psychological, and behavioral.
So you can sustain that long-term commitment in really any endeavor.
Exactly. We're going to trace this concept from its linguistic DNA all the way through to the pillars of steadfastness. All right, let's begin where the scholars always do, with the language itself. The term Fatour comes from the Arabic root. Athasi e'etsa. What does that root tell us about the nature of this state?
What's immediately crucial about this root is its core meaning. It fundamentally implies weakness or slackening, but specifically after a period of intensity.
After intensity, that's the key part.
It's the key. Think of something hot that's now cooling down, or something that was moving fast and is now slowing. The essence is the deviation from a previous higher state of activity. Sources like Lisan al-Arab are really clear. This isn't just being idle. It's the process of decline.
So if someone never starts a marathon, they're idle. But if they sprint the first 5 miles and then completely collapse and have to walk the rest, that process of collapsing is closer to Fatour.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
It's predicated on a period of prior effort. And that distinction is vital for diagnosis. If you're starting from zero, your challenge is inertia.
Right.
But if you're experiencing Fatour, your challenge is managing that residual momentum and the inevitable psychological letdown that comes after a major peak.
And the most profound linguistic example our sources use to set the conceptual standard is from the Quran, describing the angels. The phrase is so powerful.
They do not weaken or tire from their worship.
That negation is everything, isn't it?
It is. By stating that the angels do not experience Fatour, the sources establish an ideal of tireless, perpetual devotion. It's a standard of sustained energy that is, non-negotiable in the divine realm. Humans, by contract, are flawed. We experience this state constantly.
So the angel's tireless nature serves as the aspirational benchmark we're contrasted against.
Precisely.
Which brings us to the terminological or the conceptual meaning. If the linguistic root is about cooling down after heat, how does that translate into a human psychological state?
Generally, Fatour is understood as laziness or sluggishness. But we have to be more precise. Scholars, including contemporary figures like Dr. Nasser Al-Omar, insist that it's specifically a state of slowing down that follows a period of diligence and vitality.
So if you were once really diligent in your morning routine and now you're skipping it, that lapse is Fatour.
Exactly. And this precision helps us differentiate it from other related but distinct concepts.
Like, for instance, how is Fatour different from just being perpetually lazy or kasal, or from what we today call burnout?
That's a really important distinction. Kasal, or laziness, often implies a lack of will to even begin a duty, is voluntary sloth. But Fatour is the decline after the duty has already been established and performed with some vigor.
Okay.
And burnout, in the modern sense, often describes this chronic exhaustion that leads to cynicism and, reduced professional efficacy. Now, while burnout can definitely cause Fatour, the classical concept is broader.
Broader how?
It includes spiritual and emotional decline. Even if you're not overworked in the modern sense, you might just be overcommitted temporarily or maybe spiritually complacent. The key is always that previous high point.
So when you feel this specific kind of motivational withdrawal, that dip after the peak, It isn't a sign of some fundamental failure. It's a predictable psychological response to intensity.
Absolutely.
Pero-
And the sources frame this recognition as essential for your own self-development. Recognizing you are in the Fatour phase, the cooling down phase, is the first step toward managing it. It helps you avoid that spiral of guilt or the tendency to just abandon your goals entirely.
Because you know it's a phase, not a permanent state.
Exactly. Understanding the concept is about having a precise diagnosis so you can apply the correct remedy. And as we'll see, that remedy is often moderation, not renewed intensity. So while the sources are very realistic about this human tendency to fluctuate, sustained, unchecked, Fatour is framed as a serious spiritual danger.
Right. It's not something to be taken lightly.
No, the condemnation really centers on a fundamental human failing, prioritizing immediate comfort over long-term, sustained commitment.
Let's go back to that aspirational benchmark, the angels. Surah Al-Anbiya says, they glorify him night and day, and they do not slacken.
And this sets the context of tireless duty. When the sources refer to this, they're underscoring a contrast. If these beings of light, with their constant duties, maintain this perpetual, unflagging devotion,
Then how much more responsibility do we have as weak, forgetful humans to guard against lethargy in our own, far less strenuous duties?
it's a powerful challenge to our consistency.
Then we move to the direct command given to the prophets Musa and Harun. Go, you and your brother, with my signs, and do not slacken in my remembrance.
The context here is just critical to understanding the gravity of that command. They were preparing to confront Pharaoh, the ultimate symbol of tyranny and arrogance. The mission was monumental.
And yet, the explicit instruction was, don't slacken.
Don't slacken. The sources universally interpret this to mean that consistency in remembrance, or dhikr, isn't just a virtue. It's the prerequisite for divine support. It's the actual fuel required to fulfill any great, demanding mission.
So any slackening is seen as compromising the very source of your strength.
It is. And the condemnation sharpens considerably when addressing the reluctance of believers. There's this visceral image in Surah At-Tawbah that is just unforgettable.
Oh, you who have believed, what is the matter with you that when you are called to go forth in the cause of Allah, you cling heavily to the earth?
Clinging heavily to the earth. I mean, it's a masterclass in metaphor. It perfectly illustrates Fatour. It suggests this crushing psychological and physical reluctance.
As if the gravity of your immediate worldly comforts, ease, safety, wealth, has suddenly become irresistible.
And the condemnation here is severe because it highlights a failure to choose the eternal over the temporal. It's an intellectual and spiritual failure to prioritize, where the immediate burden of the duty just outweighs the promised eternal reward.
But the most severe condemnation links this external behavioral lethargy directly to a profound internal crisis. That's in Surah An-Nisa, which defines a mark of the hypocrite.
Right. And when they stand for prayer, they stand lazily.
This is a pivotal point for diagnosing the deepest form of Fatour. When lethargy is applied to something obligatory like prayer, it can signal, well, not just lack of effort, but outright hypocrisy or nifaq.
Let's just unpack the emotional reality of standing lazily. This is the existential weight you feel when you're performing a duty purely out of social obligation or fear, not love or sincerity. For the hypocrite, the act of prayer lacks internal conviction.
They're only seeking to be seen.
Exactly. And so, consequently, the prayer feels physically heavy and draining because their heart isn't invested in it.
So the body and the mind are literally fighting the action because the underlying intention is corrupted or missing entirely. It's the worst kind of performative effort.
Yes. And the prophet reinforced this by observing which prayers were the heaviest for the hypocrites. Fajr, the dawn prayer, and Isha, the night prayer.
Because those are the times when there's no public audience, no one to impress.
Precisely. If the obligation feels heaviest when you are alone, that's a sign that sincerity is lacking, and the Fatour is symptomatic of a lack of genuine internal motivation. The spiritual danger is profound. Consistent, unaddressed lethargy corrupts the core intention.
And this corruption of intention is exactly why the prophet proactively modeled the avoidance of lethargy through specific targeted supplications, or du'a.
Yes. The Sunnah provides the antidote. There's a comprehensive du'a against multiple afflictions, and it places laziness in the highest company.
O Allah, I seek refuge in you from anxiety and sorrow, weakness and laziness, miserliness and cowardice, the burden of debt, and being overpowered by men.
Laziness, Gesal, is not a small thing there. It's listed right alongside sorrow, crippling debt, and being overpowered.
It connects them, doesn't it?
intrinsically. The sources analyze this dua by showing that laziness leads to weakness, which prevents productivity. This lack of productivity can lead to debt and prevents you from handling life's responsibilities, which then fosters anxiety and sorrow.
It's a whole cycle of self-sabotage.
It is. The Prophet modeled proactive spiritual defense against this cycle, recognizing laziness as a formidable psychological foe that requires seeking supernatural support to overcome. It's not about just willing yourself out of it. It's recognizing its fundamental threat to human function.
So on one hand, we have this profound condemnation of sustained lethargy, yet the sources are also deeply realistic about human capacity. We're not angels.
Right.
So if consistent effort is the goal, how do we navigate that inevitable human low point?
And that's where the scholarly pragmatism really enters the discussion. The reality is that spiritual commitment, just like physical energy, is subject to a constant cycle of fluctuation. The wisdom lies in how you manage the decline, ensuring it doesn't lead to total abandonment.
Before we talk about the fluctuation itself, let's clarify that conceptual difference scholars made between blameworthy reluctance and involuntary incapacity, the difference between kasal and edges.
Yes, that distinction is absolutely essential for your mental health and self-assessment. Laziness, kasal, is voluntary. It's a failure of the will to perform obligatory duties, so it's inherently blameworthy.
Okay.
However, weakness, edges, is involuntary incapacity. It could be genuine physical illness, crushing mental exhaustion, or old age. We're told to seek refuge from edges, but we are commanded to fight kasal.
And Al-Kalabadi adds an interesting layer to this, noting that restraint isn't always a bad thing.
Indeed. He observed that laziness is only sinful when it's applied to obligatory duties. But if you exercise praiseworthy restraint in unnecessary voluntary acts to prevent overexertion, that restraint is actually wise.
So if you skip your morning obligatory prayer, that's Fatour rooted in kasal. But if you restrain yourself from fasting voluntarily every single day to maintain energy for your family duties, that's sound judgment.
Exactly. The difference lies in the priority that's being preserved.
And this leads us directly to the core concept for sustainability, the fatra, or the period of decline, and the Prophet's guidance on using moderation to navigate it.
This is one of the most powerful insights in all the sources. The famous hadith of Ibn Abbas states, "Every act of worship has its enthusiasm, and every enthusiasm has a period of decline." Fatour.
That one phrase immediately normalizes the experience. It basically tells you fluctuation is built into the system.
Yes, we are designed to peak and then dip, but the critical guidance that follows is the path to safety. Whoever's decline is aligned with my sunnah has been rightly guided.
What does that mean exactly? Aligned with my sunnah.
It means the decline itself is inevitable, but deviation is not. When you are low on energy, you have to stick rigorously to the established path, the sunnah. You have to avoid both extremism and, critically, innovation or engaging in sin, which are major temptations during low periods.
So turning to some new, unproven method or just giving in to sin during that fatra, that's what leads to spiritual ruin.
That's the danger. When your energy is low, you don't need a new, complicated 12-point recovery plan. You need to reduce complexity and cling to the basics.
This rejection of overexertion is beautifully captured in that anecdote of Zainab's rope.
It's the ultimate instruction against self-harming discipline. Zainab had tied a rope in the mosque so she could hold on to it when she got tired during long, voluntary prayers.
And the Prophet saw it.
He saw it, and his instruction was immediate and absolute. Untie it. Let one pray with energy. When tired, let them sit.
Untie the rope. I mean, stop the excessive compulsion. What's the broader conceptual lesson there for modern life, where we're always told to just push through the pain?
Well, Imam Nawawi commented that this incident teaches balance and the rejection of extremism. The moment a duty becomes something you resent or something you have to physically prop yourself up to perform, you risk turning devotion into drudgery.
And that's counterproductive.
Totally counterproductive. Worship must be performed with energy and sincerity. If fatigue sets in, you rest, you recuperate, and you return strong. Forcing yourself into a state where you resent the effort guarantees you'll abandon it later. Sustainable effort requires respect for human capacity.
Which leads directly to the counsel given to Abdullah ibn Amr, who was seeking that extreme intensity.
Right. Abdullah was trying to achieve continuous, intense worship fasting all day, praying all night. The Prophet warned him specifically, do not be like so-and-so who used to stand at night in prayer, then abandoned it.
So the concern wasn't the intensity itself, but the fact that it would lead to abandonment.
Exactly. The sources explain that overexertion guarantees burnout, which is far worse than slow, steady consistency. The Prophet championed the deeds that are consistent. even if they are few. This is the core operating philosophy for overcoming Fatour. Prioritize consistency over intensity.
If the prophet provided the foundation, the successors offered the practical resource management plan for the low points. I'm thinking of Umar ibn al-Khattab's advice.
Umar's statement is a masterpiece of psychological management, he said. These hearts have moments of eagerness and withdrawal. If they are eager, engage them in voluntary acts, and if they withdraw, stick to the obligations.
That's the perfect application. When the energy tank is full, use that excess to build up spiritual credit with optional extras. When the heart withdraws during that fatra, ruthlessly conserve energy by sticking only to the mandatory minimums.
It prevents the dip from becoming total abandonment. It acknowledges the cyclical nature of our energy, and it removes the guilt associated with not being perfect, so long as the obligations remain non-negotiable.
And Umar also provided a powerful secondary warning about what often triggers the decline, the danger of praise.
Yes, he warned, praise is like slaughter, meaning commendation, whether it's public or private, can lead to arrogance, complacency, and spiritual laziness.
Let's unpack that metaphor, like slaughter.
Praise acts like a premature fulfillment of the ego's reward system. Your soul feels it has already completed the effort and received the payment. This triggers a psychological mechanism that says, I've done enough. This false sense of completion is a primary trigger for Fatour.
Because it encourages you to rely on external validation rather than internal sincerity.
Precisely. So, to synthesize this, Ibn al-Qayyim reminds us that fatigue is inevitable, but it's how we manage the inevitable fall that matters.
It's not about avoiding the fall.
It's about remaining close to moderation and fulfilling your obligations during the decline. If you can do that, remain moderate, avoid sin, fulfill the mandatory acts during the fatra, your hope to recover and return even stronger, having learned resilience. The path to recovery is paved with small, consistent, intentional choices.
Okay, this is where the analysis becomes purely diagnostic. For you, the listener, to manage Fatour, you first need to identify it and understand its severity. Let's look at the scholarly categorization of slackness.
The sources categorize lethargy into 4 distinct types, which really helps us understand the root of the problem.
Okay, what's type 1?
Type 1 is total lethargy. This is the most severe. It involves a complete and heavy disinterest where required duties feel unbearably burdensome and undesired. We discussed its critical association with hypocrisy, nifaq.
So this isn't just temporary exhaustion. This is a state where you have to drag yourself to perform an obligation, often just to be seen. If the obligatory acts feel like a physically draining weight consistently, that's a serious spiritual crisis.
It is. It indicates a heart that resists the divine command entirely. If you feel actual resentment towards the requirement itself, that is the deepest red flag.
What's next?
Type 2. Selective lethargy. This is less severe and much more common. It manifests as intense laziness in some acts, typically the voluntary deeds, the nawafil. The person accepts and performs the obligations, but their commitment to going the extra mile just dissolves.
This sounds like perpetual maintenance mode. You're doing the bare minimum, but you have no capacity for growth or spiritual surplus.
That's a great way to describe it. It signals spiritual weakness, where the gravitational pull of the world is just too strong to allow for non-mandatory ascendance.
Okay, what's type 3?
Type 3. General physical laziness despite strong desire. This is the classic example of the willing spirit and the weak flesh. The desire and love for worship are strong. The person genuinely wants to be better. But physical, mental, or psychological fatigue prevents the action.
And the defining characteristic here is?
Profound regret and remorse after the lapse. That remorse distinguishes it immediately from the first 2 types. The will is present, the intention is pure, but the capacity is absent. This calls for rest and self-compassion, not condemnation.
And the last one.
Type 4. Temporary situational lethargy. This is short-term slackness caused by identifiable external factors. A heavy workload, an acute illness, recovery from trauma, necessary travel. The sources wisely classify this as normal human nature if it's not chronic. It requires basic management and patience, not a complete overhaul.
That framework is incredibly helpful for diagnosis. Now let's move to the tangible behavioral manifestations, the red flags you can identify in yourself, starting with the internal state. Hardness of the heart, qaswat al-qalb.
This is the spiritual antenna going silent. It's a heart that's unresponsive to spiritual reminders, to the Quran, or to the reality of the hereafter. The sources cite Surah As-Zumar, so woe to those whose hearts are hardened against the remembrance of Allah.
What does that actually feel like psychologically?
Ibn Sa'di's commentary gives us the psychological feeling. These hearts find no peace in remembrance, and they remain heedless. Imagine reading an article about a massive humanitarian crisis and feeling absolutely nothing. No compassion, no anger, no desire to act. That emotional numbness in the face of truth is kaswatat called.
A primary behavioral symptom of this hardening is then avoiding righteous company.
Yes. When Fatour sets in, the first thing a person abandons is accountability. They stop showing up to the mosque, the study circle, even the gym if their friends are there. They weaken ties with positive, goal-oriented companions and gravitate toward those who justify their own decline.
The analogy of the companion, the carrier of musk versus the blacksmith's bellows, is so powerful here.
It's practical sociology. The good companion is like the carrier of musk. Even if they don't give you any perfume, you still benefit from the pleasant scent of their presence. The bad companion is the blacksmith's bellows. They either burn you with their bad habits or leave you smelling of smoke.
Good company forces accountability and spiritual hygiene.
It does. It protects you from the devil, who, as the prophet noted, is with the one and is farther from two.
The third major symptom is that crippling realization of wasting time and lack of purpose.
This is the loss of barakah, or blessing, in your time. You feel busy, you're running from task to task, but at the end of the day or week, there's little meaningful achievement. You're constantly distracted by trivialities, your phone, the internet, empty conversation, and neglecting your core priorities. The sheer volume of wasted time is a tangible sign that Fatour has eroded your sense of purpose.
And this loss of discipline leads right into the fourth sign: chaotic work habits.
The sources describe a lack of seriousness. This person starts projects impulsively, driven by a momentary zeal, but abandons them halfway through. There are no clear goals, no direction. They confuse activity with productivity.
And that inability to see a task through to completion is a reflection of the internal spiritual inconsistency that defines Fatour.
It is. And tied to that is a very modern affliction we might call self-deception with busyness. This is a subtle but potent form of avoidance. The person is actively seeking out minor, empty tasks, organizing their desk for the fifth time, reading every article on a side topic, convincing themselves they're being productive, while studiously avoiding the actual heavy duties.
It's a psychological justification for not doing the necessary, difficult work.
Exactly. Dr. Nasser El-Amar noted this as being idle but imagining himself productive.
The sixth sign is a profound one: lack of anger toward violating boundaries.
Gira. This is the loss of protective jealousy for the divine boundaries. When lethargy sets in, you become emotionally numb to sin and disobedience, either your own or society's. You passively accept evil, failing to feel the spiritual necessity to correct it.
Which directly contravenes the hadith on changing evil with your hand, your tongue, or at least hating it with your heart.
Yira is a spiritual immune response. When it dies, the soul is left unprotected. The loss of gira means your spiritual sense of honor is asleep. If you can tolerate injustice or decay without internal distress, your commitment has profoundly slackened.
And this all culminates in the final symptom: the absence of a sense of responsibility.
The underlying text here is Surah Al-Azab, where man undertook the divine trust. A person experiencing severe Fatour is detached from that trust. They lack seriousness toward their duties, familial, professional, communal. They're disconnected from the concerns of the community, living aimlessly with low ambitions.
They've essentially dropped the burden of that trust.
Yes, leading to a state of aimless existence and spiritual ignorance about their ultimate purpose.
Okay, we've defined and cataloged the symptoms. Now we have to dive into the specific internal and external factors that trigger Fatour, the diagnosis required for effective prevention. Let's start with the internal causes: neglect and extremism.
The first and most foundational internal cause is neglecting the remembrance of Allah. Dhikr. If dhikr is the fuel, then neglecting it leads to spiritual coldness and atrophy.
Ibn al-Qayyim offers a really vivid description of the consequences of this spiritual forgetfulness.
He says, "The more one is heedless, the thicker the rust on the heart. And when the heart is rusted, truth is seen as falsehood and falsehood as truth." This is a powerful metaphor for cognitive and spiritual corruption. When the heart forgets Allah, the mind becomes confused.
You can't distinguish right from wrong anymore.
And you're incapable of finding motivation for good. And there's a self-destructive loop here, isn't there? The Quran says in Al-Hajj, He made them forget themselves.
So by neglecting the remembrance of the Creator, you lose all self-awareness, accountability, and purpose.
You become a stranger to your own highest potential. It traps you in confusion and indifference to the hereafter, which is the very definition of heedlessness.
The second internal cause is paradoxical because it stems from excessive zeal, excessiveness in worship. overdoing it. This is the direct route to burnout and guaranteed Fatour.
We're circling back to the Prophet's advice to Abdullah ibn Amal, establishing the necessity of sustainability. The instruction was crystal clear. Do not do that. Fast and break your fast. Pray and sleep. Your body has a right over you. Your eyes have a right over you.
He was laying down a charter of rights: the right of the body to rest, the right of your family to companionship, the right of the self to a sustainable pace.
Exactly. The key concept here is that continuous small deeds are superior to extreme practices that eventually lead to complete quitting. If you begin intensely and burn out after 3 weeks, the long-term negative consequence of abandonment far outweighs the fleeting virtue of that initial zeal.
Extremism inevitably breeds Fatour.
It does. Now let's explore the external and systemic causes. The danger of intentionally seeking hardship in religious duties.
This one is interesting.
Imam al-Shatibi analyzed this deeply. He argued that seeking deliberate, unnecessary hardship in worship, hoping to gain extra reward, is counterproductive because it leads to aversion.
Why?
Because the human soul is naturally averse to what is difficult to maintain. So if you make faith unnecessarily burdensome, your soul begins to dread it and eventually wishes to escape the obligation entirely.
Which contradicts the idea that Allah has endeared faith to our hearts.
Exactly. Moderation makes the path loving and sustainable. Intentional rigor, outside of commanded effort, transforms devotion into a heavy, resented obligation, a fast track to type 3 Fatour.
The fourth cause involves human attachments, worldly attachments, and materialism.
When you make worldly pleasures your ultimate goal, you shift your entire priority structure. Sululukum warns, so let not the worldly life delude you. If your entire internal operating system is geared toward material gain, what happens to your spiritual affairs?
They scatter.
They scatter. Let's elaborate on that mechanism of scattering of his affairs based on the prophetic warning.
Right. Whoever makes the world his concern, Allah will scatter his affairs, place poverty before his eyes, and he will not receive anything from this world except what is written for him.
This is a profound spiritual and psychological diagnosis. The scattering of affairs means constant anxiety, decision paralysis, lack of focus. You're chasing 10 things at once, yet nothing coheres.
And you only receive your destiny anyway, but you suffer the penalty of anxiety and chaos while you chase it.
You're never content, regardless of your achievement, because your goals are shifting sands.
And the fifth cause connects this materialism back to the internal state, neglecting the remembrance of death and the hereafter.
When reflection on death is absent, you naturally assume temporal permanence, which breeds heedlessness and complacency.
This is why visiting graves is encouraged, right? Not for morbidity, but for perspective.
Exactly. The Prophet encouraged visiting graves because they remind you of death. Al-Munawi explained that reflection on death softens the heart, acts as a powerful preventative against trivial sins, and instantly puts the chasing of worldly concerns into perspective. It breaks the cycle of delusion that triggers Fatour.
Finally, we have to look at the structural environmental cause: weakness in educational or spiritual upbringing.
This is a crucial systemic factor for instability. A weak foundation, either in childhood or during your early commitment phase, makes you vulnerable to Fatour. This weakness manifests as a lack of initiative, fostering passivity, low self-confidence.
And a failure to grasp the concepts of reward and punishment.
Right, which erodes moral discipline. And the teaching methodology itself can inadvertently cause Fatour. If educators or mentors rely on excessive, non-compassionate reprimanding, or they overload responsibilities onto someone before they're ready, the result is discouragement, resentment, and alienation from the very duties they should learn to love.
A balanced approach is essential.
The middle path is essential for cultivating resilient, steadfast individuals who can manage their inevitable decline appropriately. So we've gone through definition, condemnation, fluctuation, symptoms, and causes. Now we get to the action plan, the concrete steps and conceptual pillars provided by the sources for maintaining consistency and overcoming lethargy.
The first, most immediate spiritual action is supplication for steadfastness.
This is the acknowledgement of our need for external support. You begin by admitting your vulnerability and seeking divine stability. The Prophet frequently recited, "O turner of the hearts, keep my heart firm on your religion."
So you're acknowledging that the heart is volatile and requires supernatural assistance to remain committed.
You seek the strength you lack before you attempt any behavioral change.
Second, the sources emphasize consistency in morning and evening remembrances. Adhkar.
This is structured mindfulness. The reward is immense, but the psychological benefit is continuity. The prophet said that sitting in focused remembrance from dawn until sunrise and again from Asr until sunset brings tremendous reward.
What does that do practically?
It establishes two non-negotiable anchors in your day. It revitalizes the heart and prevents the heedlessness that causes Fatour to set in the first place.
Moving to the environmental solution, the vital role of keeping good company.
Environment is destiny. A person is upon the religion of his close friend, so let each one of you look at whom he befriends. If you're struggling with Fatour, surrounding yourself with individuals who are energized, accountable, and purposeful is your most effective external countermeasure.
Good company provides the necessary pressure and positive influence to prevent your decline from becoming total abandonment.
Absolutely. The fourth remedy is a return to humility, constant lyric, and seeking forgiveness.
Why are those two paired?
Dhikr is the constant nourishment for the heart. Seeking forgiveness, or istighfar, is paired with it because it models humility. The prophet, even in his high state, sought forgiveness over 100 times a day. This practice ensures constant self-reflection and prevents the arrogance, the praise is like slaughter effect that often triggers Fatour. It's the mechanism of continuous course correction.
Finally, we have to discuss the power of voluntary acts, Nawafil, but in a balanced way.
Right, respecting the warnings against extremism. Once your obligations are secure and your foundation is stable, voluntary acts are the ladder to enhance spiritual capacity. The narration states that through Nawafil, the servant draws near to Allah until he loves him, and then I become his hearing, his sight, his hand, and his foot.
They compensate for shortcomings and strengthen the bond.
And, critically, they strengthen the bond of love that makes worship enduring. They are your surplus energy reservoir.
So let's consolidate this entire journey into the three conceptual pillars for sustainable faith.
They are moderation, consistency, and love.
Moderation is the rejection of the rope-avoid extremes. Seek sustainable, steady effort over intense, unsustainable zeal.
Consistency means making the core obligations non-negotiable. Stick to the basics, especially when you are in the Fatra. It's better to do a small, good deed reliably than a huge deed just once.
And the final pillar, love versus fear. How does this redefine the experience of duty?
This principle suggests that actions based on fear may be interrupted by hope, but actions out of love are not subject to spiritual fatigue.
So if you only perform a duty out of fear of penalty, once hope of forgiveness rises, your motivation might slacken.
But if you perform it out of genuine foundational love and act of connection and joy, that worship is enduring, resilient, and far less susceptible to the draining effects of Fatour.
And the final tool we discussed, reflection. Using remembrance of death and the day of judgment to reignite your zeal and purpose.
A constant awareness of eternity is the antidote to the triviality that causes Fatour. It prevents us from being satisfied with the transient world, breaking the cycle of heedlessness that triggers decline in the first place. This reflection forces accountability and refocuses your ambition on the things that truly matter. #outro.
We took a deep dive into Fatour, moving beyond simple definitions of motivational dips to construct a comprehensive framework for diagnosing and treating spiritual, psychological, and behavioral decline, all rooted in centuries of classical wisdom.
We established that fluctuation is natural and expected, but failure is not. The objective is to align those dips with moderation and consistency, ensuring that the necessary recovery phase remains tied to your core obligations. We learned that managing the fall is where true resilience is forged.
And the remedies: seeking help, structuring your day with adhkar, surrounding yourself with good company, and focusing on small, consistent deeds are universally applicable principles for sustaining effort in any vital area of your life. Remember the Prophet's instruction. The most beloved deeds are those that are consistent, even if they are few.
What's fascinating here is the weight the scholars assign to maintaining momentum. Ibn al-Qayyim suggested that a single pause in one spiritual journey can cost you gains greater than all your previous earnings.
Wow.
If that is true, if the cost of Fatour is so high, how does the daily, almost imperceptible accumulation of small, consistent efforts, especially those actions driven by love rather than fear, redefine the very concept of spiritual wealth and security?
That is something for you to mull over as you seek to maintain your own vital commitments and manage your inevitable energy dips.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into sustainability.
Until next time, stay well informed and stay persistent.